So we'll continue. I think you guys were hearing some of the conversation from the previous session. I know you walked in about 5 minutes ago. So I'm going to ask you very trick questions from the previous session. Continuing this, we did talk about how business is disrupting, business models are disrupting. We talked about how we are moving to a sharing economy and the whole platforms and part of it. The second thematic that we are seeing more and more is around how everything is becoming a service. People no longer care about owning a product, owning a box, or owning a particular asset, but rather owning an experience and owning it as a service. So I would love to hear your thoughts on each of them. But before we walk into it, round of introduction. Wido, with you first.
Wido Menhardt. I'm responsible for clinical informatics at Beckman Coulter, which is probably not a brand name. We make diagnostic equipment. So if you get your blood drawn to know about your cholesterol or your blood count, those samples get sent to a lab, and in that lab there are several big machines that do these tests, one test every couple of seconds. We make those machines. Beckman Coulter is a $3 billion company, and we are part of the Danaher Corporation, which is about $20 billion.
Thank you, Wido. Deepak?
My name is Deepak Visweswaraiah. I'm the Vice President of Engineering and Managing Director for NetApp. I run the NetApp Center in India, as well as run all of our manageability business worldwide. NetApp is a $6 billion company purely in the storage space. If you look at it pretty soon, probably will be the lone enterprise level storage, pure play storage player, if you will. And certainly the technology disruption or the business model disruption is something that even we as a company are going through at this time, right? So yeah, very much in the storage part of the infrastructure business.
Sounds good. Srinivas?
Yeah, my name is Srinivas. I'm part of Sonata, and in Sonata we focus on 3 verticals, mainly retail, travel, and then product engineering area. I handle the product engineering area. Apart from that, I have another hat, which is about cloud and DevOps area. So our services are primarily towards enterprise ISVs, primarily. Our majority of services is to help them develop products, or migrate that into cloud, or help them into modernize the products. So those are all the areas that we work with them.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks for being here. The biggest question we talked about earlier is also, we couldn't really finish the conversation there around what transformation inside the organization that has to go through for making this business model change happen. I think this particular topic is more relevant when you are moving from a product to a service or a product to a solution, because fundamentally it tears apart your DNA internally, how you think about what do you mean to your customers, your relationship with your customer, et cetera, all that. So we'll probably spend a little more time on that. But I think each of you come from very different industries. So I would like to kick off this discussion with asking you, how has this shift from product to services type of a transition, has it affected your industry, and how are you seeing that? So Wido, if you could talk about what's happening in the diagnostics space.
Sure. So we have these big machines that we put in labs, and in order for them to operate, there's also a large supply chain of different chemicals and reagents that need to be delivered to the labs in order for the machines to run. So what we could be doing, and on occasion do, is sell these machines, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in other cases, we might sell the machine or put it there for free, and then supply the chemistry so that the customer would pay for each bottle or each cartridge of chemistry or reagent that they consume. But in the large majority of the cases, we actually charge the customer per test that they report to their clinicians. So not only for each test that is performed, but for each test that actually gets reported back to the clinician and to you as a consumer. A test might not be trustworthy for some reason, because of quality control failing or something like that. So those tests we don't change for. And the analogy that we talked about yesterday, imagine this, and maybe this is actually what I'm going to do with my life. So imagine that you are Kenmore or something. You build washing machines. And everybody here has probably bought a washer at home. And you paid for that as a capital expense, and you go to Safeway and buy your detergent, etc. Now imagine that I'm going to change that business model completely to say, I'm going to give you the washer for free and the detergent for free. And every time you wash a shirt, that's when you're going to pay me. And not only that, I'm only going to charge you if that shirt is clean. So if it comes out and it still has a stain, that's for free. You can wash it again. Only when it's clean is when we pay you. So that's our business model right now.
It's a very drastic shift from selling the machines and I don't care what you do with it to enabling an outcome kind of a thing.
Right.
I would love to understand how is that, as an organization, how are you guys thinking about this transformation internally? What does it mean in the way you structure yourself? How do your people think about it?
Yeah, so the whole supply chain about getting chemistry to your customer, for example, is front, left, and center. The shifts that we see are actually maybe one step further, which is the healthcare system in the US. We heard this morning as well, and elsewhere in the world as well, is changing very much from fee for service to something outcomes-based, value-based, outcomes-based, risk-sharing are all the terminologies that are being used. And essentially, it's a focus not on what I provide as a product or as a test result or a diagnostic result, but a focus on what is the outcome for a particular patient or for a population. So we've been able to fit very well into the healthcare system with our pay per test system, because that's how our customers get paid as well. So that matches perfectly, and it's not a big transformation. Now our customers want to, because they're being paid based on population outcomes, they would like to see how we can fit into that. And that's very challenging. If I go back to the washer analogy, so now it's not only about a shirt that has been washed or a shirt that is now clean. It's actually you wash that shirt because you're going to go to the job interview. You want to get the job. How about you only pay me if you get the job? So that's the analogy for healthcare that we're looking at, and we haven't really managed to make that transformation yet.
I think that's quite scary in the way,
Yeah.
companies actually have to think about all these outcomes and all that.
Right.
But what you're saying is that's the business pressure right now.
Right.
That's where the industry is moving
Or the
towards.
opportunity,
Right.
because
Yeah.
nobody has figured it out.
Nobody's figured it out
So
yet.
we'll be first.
Exactly. Deepak, I know NetApp is going through a significant similar shift as yours. Can you describe that?
Yeah, if you look at it, right, infrastructure, which is typically a huge part of any enterprise and any business that you run, right? Most of the time, probably, I don't know, if I ask in the crowd, how many IT groups do an awesome job, I'm sure no hands will go up, right? It's really a thankless job. And most of the time, what they're looking at is how do I reduce my cost of operations? How do I manage to reduce my spend, versus the revenue that I do or what have you, right? That I think has driven significant amount of change. I look at it in three aspects, right? One from a technology perspective, one from a people perspective, and one from a consumption or a business model perspective, right? So if you look at from a technology perspective, most of the newer generations of the business or applications, if you will, are developed in a different model than what you are used to in a traditional form of business. In the sense that if there is an IT organization, if there is a CIO that I talk to these days, typically they have two parts of their organization. One that really keeps the lights on, manages their traditional applications that are mission critical, what have you, all of that stuff. But they also have a new set of people or groups that are really building apps in a different way. They are building it. They're all really born on the cloud. They are they use a different consumption model. Most of that is decided by lines of business and not really by IT. Right? And so there is a whole different aspect of how agile that development of those products or applications are, and then what it is viewed as within an organization. And if you look at it from a people perspective, what you see in the IT organizations today in terms of being able to run a set of operations, the traditional way of having an administrator for each of the verticals is gone, right? It's actually history. Nobody has a system administrator, a storage administrator, a virtual, infrastructure administrator, or an application admin. Now everything is, one. It's all rolled up into one. So they are looking for simpler ways to do things. The skill set within the people is not really as deep because they have to be broad in order to be able to run the entire gamut of stuff, right? And so it does become a challenge for what they are consuming, right? In terms of products offered in the infrastructure space, have to be simpler to use. The user experience is, yes, don't give me all the knobs to turn. Just tell me what the best way to do it is and do it. I want to push a button, get it done, and then be done, right? And then thirdly, in terms of both business and consumption models, right? I think, Wido talked about it a little bit in terms of why do I want to put my capital expense up front to be able to realize anything, right? Now it is about, in the whole new DevOps world, I'm actually going to use everything as a service. I'm going to test and fail early, or be able to determine in terms of where I go. And really, if it comes to that, and if I have to move something into production, and if I have to have it on my on-premises inside data center, then I'll think about that. Otherwise, I use everything as a service and then pay for, as a service, that shirt that gets you the job, right? This is what you pay for, right?
Right.
And I think that's the shift that you see, and that's really how I look at it in terms of if you break it down into those three areas.
Got it. I think you
shift.
distilled it quite well. I'll really love, Wido, I really love your shirt analogy. So I'm going to go back and say, am I doing a good job? Only then I'll pay for the shirt or the cleaning of the shirt. But I think while the example is simple, it really brings out the change and the shift beautifully, because we can all relate to it. Manufacturing or washing a shirt is a very technical job, but ensuring that this shirt meets a particular purpose for the customer is a really hard job. It's not a not technical job. It's more of a softer understanding your customer a lot more closer, and that's what you're talking about. Don't give me all the knobs. You just do it. But I can't do it if I don't know what you want to get done. So going all the way to understanding what the customer's goal becomes very clear. So Srinivas, you guys help with a lot of organizations. You work with them. Do you think conventional large organizations who have been living and breathing the building the washer and giving it to the customer model, do you think they can make the transition to actually understanding the end purpose and aligning to that purpose? What is your experience been?
In our case, I think we work with all the three kinds of places. At least the experience we have had is startups who are willing to, and then who come with that kind of thought process up front. Then we are seeing traditional brick and mortar enterprises who are doing the service. Because they have already done the service, they are now saying, I need to just bring the platform to be able to operate in that zone, right? The one who struggles really is the one who is a traditional engineering company, or software engineering company, where the disruption is larger, right? So what we have seen is, they know that the direction is clear, that as a service is the reality. They need to go that side. What is the pace that they need to adapt? That's one problem that they face. Once they decide that they need to go that side, there is a lot more value disruption, right? So they used to earlier develop the product and then throw it out. People used to then deploy it in their systems, and then the consumers used to be within the system, and then only if there are issues, there is a ticket that goes. Now you need to adapt to the situation where you develop the product and you also productionize it. So this area that I have to productionize it, and I need to manage this, and I need to service so many customers at the same time. is a larger problem that they need to face. They had this kind of capability earlier in terms of support, but it was a ticket. Now we are talking about monitoring, you're talking about managing the customer expectations, and you're also talking about ensuring that the tickets go there. So there's a larger problem that they are facing. The second level is when I put the product there, I need to be able to reach so many customers there who needs to get this new product implemented for them. Because earlier it was in-house, somebody was managing it. Now, this ability to implement the product for the customer, I might have to have that. I have to have support of cloud providers. I have to have supporters of my implementers who are on the field. If you ask me, they were there earlier, but the dynamics are new now, because there is certain kind of dependency in each of them. So those are the changes that I think most of these people are struggling with. They will ultimately go there. If you ask me, all these people will reach there, but the problems are new. They need to understand these problems. What is the depth of the problem? They need to understand, and they need to go towards that direction.
Got it. So actually taking from that, you guys are going through quite a lot of disruption right now. You're changing your business model, technology, everything else in NetApp, and pretty much the DNA is getting recoded while you're probably running at like a breakneck speed. What are the challenges within the organization that you have to face? And I would probably put it in probably 3 buckets. And you've actually laid it out in your previous segment. Is the people part, and the process part, and the technology part of it. How are you thinking about it? Which is easy, which is hard, and what worked and what hasn't?
I think one aspect, I think the first thing that Srinivas talked about is accepting the fact that there is a disruption, right? Half the companies probably live in some kind of denial, that's not for me kind of thing, right?
Okay.
I think the number one thing is to be able to understand that there is a disruption happening, and then realizing the fact that if I don't play in that game, I won't be existing, in a few years.
But do you think this is an imperative across industry for everybody? Like this shift about, not just technically washing my shirt, but rather give me a clean shirt type of thing?
Absolutely. I personally believe that the change is here to stay.
For all industries?
It is a permanent change. And some of the studies actually project that probably 40% of the enterprise level companies won't exist in 5 years. Right? Which could be true if people don't necessarily address
that. Yeah.
The key thing is in terms of being able to understand, accept that. The second thing I truly believe, which is one of the things that we are doing, is rather than running away from disruption, you actually move towards the disruption. You run towards the disruption and figure out, what you need to do to play in that game, right? As long as you have the business value and what you stand for. Like in our case, right, the centerpiece is really about data. We do everything with respect to data. And that data, value of that data remains irrespective of the business model changes, technology changes, or anything for that matter, right? It doesn't matter, where my grandmother's picture is, right? Whether it was in my, Yahoo Mail, whether it was in some part of Amazon Cloud, or whether it was, on my PC, right? It is that, my grandmother's picture that I care for, not some grandmother's picture, in terms of if I had a picture in my laptop or a device and it, let's say, I backed it up and for some reason I lost it. When you want to try and retrieve that, you want your grandmother's picture, not some grandmother's picture, right? So the value, as long as you realize that value is there and you are trying to figure out what are the models that will work in the newer set of trends, I think there's absolutely opportunity for people to move in that direction. That's really what we are doing. So from a technology perspective or from a people perspective, or from a business models perspective, right? It's hard to change from a perpetual license models to be able to completely change to a service-based or a services offering, that you would have. It takes a few years. I think there are, good examples in terms of whether, you look at Adobe systems that did it over the last 4 years, you look at Intuit did it over the last few years, what have you. And there are examples of being able to do it, right? I think the infrastructure business in itself, where there's still a huge amount of, business in the traditional on-premises. That by no means is going away overnight, right? While players are going to protect that part of it, the growth is really coming from the newer trends, newer applications in terms of, where the spend, if the CIO has $1, right, where is most of that dollar going today as far as the spend, right? That's actually all in the services area as far as being able to consume things as a service in the newer model of doing engineering, in the newer model of doing things. That's really what we are focused on in being able to move. If you historically just think about what has happened, I was talking about the centerpiece being data. A few decades ago, everything was, all your data was in the mainframes, right? And then, Microsoft happened, and then we got everything, that can be doable on desktops and PCs, what have you, right? So the data all moved from your mainframes to these, and then Google happened, right? And then Google happened, everything moved to the internet, and all the emails went there, all of the most of the storage went there, or what have you. And then Apple happened, and then now everything moves to the devices. In terms of everything you have is in our pockets, more or less, right? Depends on again, the centerpiece is actually still that same data. That's really what I'm talking about as far as you identify that business value that you are looking for in your business, that you can put your business around.
Okay.
And that makes a huge difference.
Interesting. So you did talk about this shift from license to pay-per-use kind of thing. So you guys have Wido, you guys have done it already. You are charging for test and test delivery, validated tests kind of thing.
Right.
Did it put a huge pressure on your revenue structure, because earlier you were charging for this capital expense, now you're charging per test? Obviously, it's like two different models. And how did you guys navigate through that process?
Yeah, so maybe not at Beckman, but at a previous organization. I remember we acquired a traditional medical software and device company. We acquired a company that was actually providing like a subscription service, essentially, or no, actually a per diagnostic result. And I remember getting into the business reviews meeting with that new acquisition, and it was very odd, because in the traditional business you look at revenues, sales results as a key metric. But in this business, when a deal was signed for, let's say, 7 years, the revenue for the 7 years was there, right? Nothing would disrupt that unless if you were really screwing up. So revenue was actually a pretty unimportant indicator of immediate business results. So we had to look at different metrics, such as bookings in addition, right? So once you see bookings, then you know how the sales team is doing. Revenues doesn't tell you much, and that is a big cultural shift.
Cultural change. What about internally within your?
Other cultural changes are, if you and I think you alluded to this as well, if you're in a traditional product development organization, whether it's software or hardware, the product development team is busy with release next, release 7 or whatever, and products have been placed at customer sites. If the product at the customer site doesn't work, customer service gets called in, and it takes a long time that maybe it might come back as a level 3 to the engineering organization, but most of the time it doesn't. So the development organization is completely unaffected by it. Can you believe this? The development organization is unaffected by the customer operations. Bizarre if you think about what we're talking about here. So as a service organization, a customer is down. Some screen shows red. A customer is down. The development organization stops. They go over into the big screens. Anish was in the same company. You remember this. The development organization stops and tries to help that customer to go back up. And that's a big change, because it's pretty relaxing, I think, to sit in a development organization, code away, and be unperturbed by your customers.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And another element perhaps is also as you make the shift, your operational focus has to be quite different. People that, for example, it sounds great to move on to Amazon and everything is per click, great. But everybody who has deployed on Amazon knows that there's all sorts of hidden costs that all of a sudden emerge if you don't manage your deployment very, very carefully. It's can I use another washer analogy?
Yeah, absolutely. I like the washer example.
So now I've sold you the washer and you pay only for clean shirts, which means that every time your detergent runs out, I send you new detergent. What keeps you from using twice as much detergent because you think it's going to be better or something like that? My whole operational model all of a sudden is screwed because I have to give you twice the amount of detergent. So fine-tuning the operations after the change is almost as important as the change itself.
Correct, absolutely. And I think it completely changes the way you think about how you run your operations, how you actually understand your customers' behavior as well. How much of question for you, Deepak, is that how much of your customers' behavior has you seen change because of this model shift?
Oh, huge actually, right? Most of our decisions actually are driven by customer behavior.
So is it like customers demand changing the organization, or this model changing their behavior? I mean, or is it like, obviously probably the middle answer is they are feeding into each other, but what leads what?
Yeah, you actually you will start seeing that symptoms in the customers, right? In our discussions with customers, they actually start asking, I want a simpler solution. Don't give me all the knobs because I don't have those many people anymore, and I need to be able to run a simpler shop. You will start hearing that, right? The next time you go talk to them, they will talk about, what. We are at this tech refresh, so I have a decision to make. Do I really buy, all of this infrastructure, or I have other options? So what are you going to do? How do you help in terms of being able to do it? Or there are multiple conversations that I have had with a number of CIOs. Is that, hey, there are certain workloads that I know can actually work better in the cloud versus being able to do on-prem, and how can you help me actually get there, right? And what can you do for us to be able to help us get there? Because yes, they've been our customers for X number of years. There is some level of that understanding and loyalty, right? And they want us to be successful, and so they do look for companies to change. And be able to help them move in a particular direction that they want to go to, right? And the thing that they will also see, the way we look at it, right? I personally believe it's not a single place where this data is going to live, in the sense that it's not all going to be public clouds, it's not all going to be on-prem, it's not all going to be private clouds, what have you, right? It's got to be a hybrid cloud. There are, the data or the workloads actually will live in multiple places, depending on what the use cases are, depending on the time, in terms of if it is cheaper to do it there this month for me because for me the load is less, yes, I'm going to use it there. But what, tomorrow when my operation scales up and then my bills start becoming really high because I'm using something as a service, and it is better to do it with a CapEx model, I want to be able to move it. But today you can't.
It's very static or fixed.
Oh.
And that's the problem. That's where you have to
try moving your Google email to Yahoo.
Yeah.
Right. What happens, right? That grandmother's picture, disappears, right? So you can't really see that.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So it's really our ability to be able to move those workloads into different endpoints, and giving that choice, flexibility to customers to be able to move those things to enable them to operate at an optimal.
So that's a goodness of working in as a service type of a model.
Absolutely.
And so Srinivas, one question. I think you guys, one point that Wido mentioned is that in the earlier development organization would kind of churn the code, put it out there. Some customers go down, and these guys are not affected. But right now, they are like so tightly integrated. If you have to operate as a service, you ought to be so operationally connected to the customer. particularly product engineering organizations find it very difficult to shift into this model as a DNA itself, and they don't think like that. What's your kind of recommendation or best practices for organizations to shift to be more services, solution focused, rather than just like, throw the product out there and you do whatever you want to do with it?
Yeah, so a couple of years or maybe a decade back, I was working with a large travel enterprise company, and they were going through a significant transformation because travel at that point in time was getting disrupted by the enterprise or internet players like Expedia and other people, and then these guys were very traditional, bundled holiday kind of players, and then they were changing. So one of the things that they realized is, I have X number of people on the support side, X number of people on the development side. The maximum work gets done the support, and the less amount of work gets done on the engineering side. They said, that's what I need to change. I want more features into the product, more product into the internet where people can start using it. That's the kind of thing that they decided. It was not acceptable to anybody. Because then that's the business need, but people have said, we're scared, right? Hey, if you are not going to have support team, and how are you going to support the internet and then the production environments? That's the kind of issues that they started talking about. But then over a period of time, as we started working and then we tightened the engineering process and then we reduced the number of issues that we see in the production, the shift started happening. People started realizing that there's no work for them, and then they started moving this side. So the consequence of that is that the people on the engineering side started seeing what's happening on the production. They started seeing, okay, if I did this is the impact on the production. And therefore, they started making themselves aware of what needs to be done better on the engineering side. So that's a model. And then after that, what I've seen is that you see Amazon models today where they have self-running pods which manage the entire supply chain of the code, right? So that's what they see. I think that's the kind of best practices people are saying in the service model the engineering teams can adopt. It's just that people need to start believing that it's something that they can work. And there are tools right now, right? So I think Deepak was talking about DevOps. So it's a kind of tool automation setup that you're going to put, which will enable the developers to be able to handle these production issues as well.
Got it. Thank you. I would like to kind of invite some comments and questions from folks here. Any comments on or questions for the panel? Yes. There's a lady with the mic. Yeah.
Hi. I have a question regarding the business model. The gentleman mentioned about the culture change, and you're not looking at the immediate revenue, and you're looking at like 7 years. How do you determine when you have I think it's very good for the consumer, but for the vendor to provide the service, how will you determine the business model is viable? I mean, when you are looking at it and put it together something for your executive, how will you determine that the business model will? In fact, I want to make a comment. A lot of the cloud companies right now, they are not profitable. Many of them are not profitable, and but they have a lot of hype and their stock price is very high. They're looking at forward, right? And many of them haven't proven to be profitable, to be honest. And actually, how as a vendor that you determine that's something that you will invest on, because it's a lot of costs incurred on the vendor now, because you have to support the product, not only the engineering side, but also the production. So there's a whole different ball game here.
That's right.
Any comment?
So who would like to take it? Srinivas, you would like to comment on it?
So in our case, what we did is the focus has been on the engineering and what is leaking from the engineering, and that was the original focus in terms of how many production issues have the engineering team have leaked into production. And once we started seeing that, and then we started publishing that to everybody in the engineering team, the team became more aware of what the problems are, right? So you start seeing the change in them when you start showing them the measures that you've started taking or measures that you have put there. So broadly, what we are seeing is today, there is a amount of monitoring that we need to do on the production, and the monitoring information that you have about the performance as well as the issues that you see is automatically shown to the engineers, development organization. It was not shown earlier. It's now started being shown to the engineers. And then when they start seeing it, the way they behave and the way they want to code, because the issue becomes their problem, it'll change. there is a change that will happen. There is a
brought
trend.
in.
Yeah.
How about you guys? Any other thoughts?
Two comments I had, right? One, what you're seeing out there in the market, you refer to the companies, especially in reference to the cloud. There are a number of them that are overvalued, hyped, absolutely, right? It is like any other hype cycle. You will actually see that. You can also bet on the fact that some of them will fall, some of them will disappear, some of them will get consolidated, and it will become, once it becomes a reasonably mature market, you will actually see some of that actually die down. To think about in terms of whether a business model is good for me, whether why should I adopt a business model? I think most of that has to come from customer conversations. There are two things: is that one, can you provide a business value, and would that really appeal as a total cost of operations for a customer? Why should they adopt? Right. Number two is that viable as a business, right? If I changed my business model from really doing it the traditional way to a different way, over a number of years, will I actually be the same company, with the same, margins, with the same profitability, and would it be a viable company, right? I think that's really what the street looks for. That's really what the investors look for. What the stakeholders look for. I think if you look at those two and really make those decisions, I think you will
Makes
look
sense.
at it.
Makes sense. All right. Anybody else? I see someone. Excuse me. I'll come to that.
Hi, I'm a technologist, and I'm trying to lead this transformation inside my organization to go from packaged boxes that we ship to subscription-based services. I think marketing is okay. I think product people are okay. I'm struggling with my sales right now. Fortunately, it's still a relatively expensive product, so it's a high-touch sales process. So instead of knowing for being compensated upon the sale, for the sale, do you have any recommendations on how to address it in case of monthly subscription? Do you suggest compensating at the time of somebody subscribing to a service? Would you amortize the revenue from that subscription over time? Do you have any insight or advice on this?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think great question, because it also goes beyond the technology aspect, but to the sales aspect too. Vido, I'd like you to.
So I've seen it every which way, and usually it changes every year because to react to how things are going. But I think there's great value in amortizing it over the years, because the salesperson, just like the engineer, is no longer in a position to just throw it over the wall. In particular, if it's high touch, long-term relationships. You need to make sure that the sales guy actually sells something that is sustainable, and the salesperson will continue to be involved with that customer for many years, and that needs to be appropriately rewarded.
So one point just wanted to ask, does the product entail kind of implementation consulting from the customer point of view?
No, just Bob.
I was going to say,
incentivize newly in this model?
I was going to say you're not the only one, so don't feel bad. So there are plenty. Think about in terms of a company like NetApp, for example, right? I mean, we our sales force is all about being able to sell a box. Right? They know how very well to do that, right? So exact same thing. I think you hit the nail on the head. The most difficult part of it is really the sales force. How do you change the mindset of the sales force? I would hate to say advice, but my thought process there is that you do need to bring in a new side to that sales force, which understands this business, which understands the way to do a new business. It's incredibly hard to change the entire sales force of knowing how to do, a box selling business to really go about doing a different business altogether, right? It's typically how, like I talked about earlier, an IT organization actually has two, separate ways of doing things, right? It's really about, in terms of you start small, in the new model, and then you start growing that while you start declining the traditional portion, and you really that's you really way amortize your over the years the impact that you would really have, right? I think more and more as you look at it in the traditional industries, if you don't bring in that sales mindset of whom you sell to and how you sell to, is going to be extremely difficult. And then you have to have that part of the sales force to bring in that experience and change the mindset.
Well, the last question here, please.
I have the same question, but
okay.
Another question is about churn. When you go as a service, you give the user a choice to change. How do you handle churn or any best practices around customer churn?
Actually, the way I look at it is you give actually lesser choices to your users, right? As a service model, right? My interoperability matrix is not as many. I don't have to support 10 operating systems because I offer it as a service and everybody has that. And you know what? I don't have to wait for a customer to upgrade. They're upgraded when I go, put a new version there, right? You don't have to. Actually, it's an easier, simpler model from an operations point of view for engineering, and it is easier to get your customers to adapt and move. The hardest part in the traditional software industry, if you will, is to get customers to get to upgrade, the newer versions, adopt the newer features that you put in. And when you start doing it as a service, it's actually an easier thing. It helps in being able to do that, and it reduces the amount of stuff that you actually need to do to be able to satisfy every customer's ask about why they use a different browser, why they use a different operating system, even versions of operating systems, what have you. One wants SQL, one wants Oracle. What? All of that is gone.
Interesting. I think that's a good point. I think once you kind of make the transition, it's a lot more simpler to operate in that model. I think that's with that, I think that's a great takeaway. Thank you very much. We've run out of time, but you guys are available, I think, offline for them to have some conversation. But thank you for sharing your experience, and I think we're all very excited to see this transition happen in all our organizations as well. We still have to fix the sales incentives part of it. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Round of applause for the.
Thank you.